welcome to another episode of the 905er podcast with me, Roland Tanner.
I am Joel McLeod.
And we're welcoming back this week friend of the podcast, Shannon Gillies. Hi, Shannon. How are you doing today?
Hello, I'm doing well. How are you?
Great, thanks. So, and I mean, we invited you back because you were a great guest the last time, and we like to. We think people need to hear from people other than Joel and me every now and again, and also just because I was reading a Twitter kind of conversation that you tweeted the other day, which sort of tweaked an interest of mine, basically with regard to how our city halls deal with it's a citizen engagement problem, but to put it in simpler, less kind of tedious sounding terminology, that very often what gets reported as a kind of citizen uprising is actually about 2 or 3 angry people, and how those conversations are framed can be very misleading and not be particularly helpful to the conversations that happen in our city. So maybe I could hand it over to you as our kind of first topic for the day to give your kind of take on that, and the guy who you were kind of reacting to, who was initially talking on Twitter.
Sure. That's something that's interested me as well. Just how issues, especially about development, are handled by our local media. So I happened to see this person's tweet. I don't think he was even someone I follow. And he's someone who's interested in housing issues from Connecticut. And it popped up. And the point he was making was that local journalists often use the big bad developer against the concerned residents trope, right? They're ruining the city. And his point was just that kind of oversimplification and that slant of the story can end up doing more harm than good in terms of, addressing housing scarcity and affordability and other issues around housing.
Well, I always thought it's an interesting point of to take, because it's something that we've kind of touched upon here on the podcast, is that it's easy to frame everything as an us and them argument, right? Like that binary argument of just, there's got to be somebody who's a villain and somebody who is the hero of a story, and especially more and more we've talked about with development, it's not quite that that cut and dry solution. There's a lot more nuance, and there's a lot more things that need to be addressed that way.
Yeah, I think nuance is the key word here. And I know that one of the most frustrating things when I ran for council, not raising this issue to toot my own horn at all, but I felt that I kept on getting pulled into that polarization that actually I wanted to get away from. But what I did want to do is sort of treat both sides with a level of respect. So in Burlington at that time, there was a very contentious issue related to development. I won't rehash all that necessarily right now. I guess my own, as I've lost count a number of times I've had this discussion on Twitter, but I have a thing about the NIMBY word, because I feel that, people have a right to have their opinions, and they may be wrong, they may be right. I think when we're talking about individual members of the public, it's kind of punching down a little bit to say, oh, well, you're just a bunch of NIMBYs, However, that doesn't mean they're right. That just means that people have a right to an opinion, and I tend to think, I think it's worth being extra respectful towards people who are not experts in a given field, who don't usually get involved in public matters or going down to the city hall or whatever. Just respecting the passion that they have, I think, is an important point. However, it's absolutely right that, from a journalism point of view, it's a hell of a lot easier to say the big bad developer. It's also a hell of a lot easier, it's know your target market to an extent, isn't it? It's like, who's going to read this? It's a lot easier to sell outrage than.
Absolutely.
But the most important point of all, I guess, is it just simplifies things to a point that are just so far beyond. mean, you end up with this situation which happened in Burlington of people feeling it was an us versus them thing, that it was all a given council's fault when it's about the province, it's about the region, it's about. Um, I mean, ultimately, I feel a lot of this is all about huge deficiencies in the way that urban planning is done in Ontario from top to bottom, with the way the zoning is done, with the way that our law has developed over decades and decades, that courageous governments might actually sit down and really take a view of reforming at a fairly fundamental level. But those are discussions which just aren't happening right now. And into that kind of void, we get this. Well, it's just easy to kind of exploit the simplest reaction to anything, which is that people don't like change, and how you get around the issue that people just don't like change when change has to happen is kind of the essence of politics in many ways. That's one of my super long points that starts off in one place, ends up in another. So feel free to comment and tell me that I was gibbering.
I think it's because it is so complicated and there are so many different levels involved that I think that contributes to the oversimplification of the issues because it's just too complex for most people to understand. Even us, who you and I both ran for council, and it's a full-time job learning how all these different growth policies work and who does what. And so I think you end up with these us versus them issues because it just gets narrowed down to that, and it's easier for people to grasp when they can see something's bad and then something's good. And this is what the newspapers do.
Well, it's again going back to something that we've talked about here on the podcast. I mean, we had Mike Moffat on a few weeks back to talk about the fact that there's a real void of supply in not only the 905 region, but kind of the province as a whole, which is what's it's contributing to the rising the runaway pricing. And I find that what angers me about this is in the media there's like the Global Mail on the weekend was talking about this in their one of their features, and they're still talking about it as if this is a bubble. I'm like, guys, this isn't a bubble. This the prices have not come down in over a decade. Like this at this point, like don't call this a bubble. It's like words do matter. Don't call it a bubble. It's something else. We are facing some of the highest housing prices in North America. Forget Canada. North America, we are pricing ourselves out of our own homes, and this is a huge
Yeah.
problem. It's a huge problem when you have you start getting into the generational divide of trying to how do millennials have housing security, and how do you encourage them to stay and contribute and to have families and build communities? Like again, we're getting deep into the weeds here, but we kind of have to because these are the consequences of these debates. And as you were saying, Shannon, framing it as an us versus them binary debate, hero and villain, it really simplifies this and really sells us all short in the fact that
Mhm.
developers developers aren't necessarily the villains of the story. They are trying to build. They build because that's what they know how to do. They know how
They
to
are what
build.
they are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're like, well, we know how to build homes. We know how to build condo buildings. That's kind of what we do.
And they make money, and there's nothing that
Yeah,
they're a business.
right. And that they're right.
They're
There's
not
nothing.
here to build affordable housing.
Well,
No, but that's
that's
where.
the million-dollar question. That is
But
that. I mean, yeah, we have good developers and bad developers in this province, and
mhm.
I think,
No doubt.
I mean, that's just that's a matter of industry regulation and the huge political clout that they have over not just one political party in this province. Um, and I mean, those are issues
There
that
are a
definitely
few.
need to be.
But again, it comes back to when the media doesn't go into these issues and give the nuanced discussion, which is something like not to toot our own horn here, Roland, but something you and I always try to do is say, well, and we've tried because these are very complex issues, and we've noticed that the overlay, like we in our previous episode with Carl and Sean, we were talking about how the need for development is now brushing up against First Nations rights in Caledonia and for the Six Nations, and you can frame that as, oh, it's just, it's a First Nations land claim. Well, that's something completely irrelevant. Well, no, it's not. It's the need for us to live in places and have affordable housing. That's directly brushing up against their what they are calling their sovereign land. Like these things are not. And then we also have the issue of the Greenbelt and Highway 413 that we've also covered. And the idea is that all these things are kind of siloed. We got to get this out of our heads. This is all connected. It's all, one does not happen without the other. Say so, and we kind of need to start coming into the fact that we need to start taking ownership of the debate and start framing this conversation not in terms of, well, I don't want my downtown to change, I don't want my community to change. We have to accept it's going to change. The question is into what. um and
And how can we make that happen? I mean, yeah, how can we make that happen? How can we build the best possible downtowns? Um, yeah, I mean, Burlington's a classic example, or is a classic example. Lots of people, I think, reasonably upset with a lot of the developments happening because I don't particularly find a lot of it to be the best that could be built. But actually, that's not a power that our municipalities have to to design at that kind of level. All they do is they kind of put blocks on a map and say these are the envelopes that you can build within, and then there's a whole load of horse trading that goes over about how big that envelope ends up being. Um, what everybody agrees is we need a huge amount more housing. What everybody agrees is not getting built right now. I guess it's not entirely agreed that. Well, I think there's increasingly a consensus amongst people who aren't politicians that you're not going to get this housing built by the development industry because why would you build affordable housing when you can build
Right.
unaffordable housing?
Mhm.
There's no, well, I mean, this is a sort of quote that I think would probably be a good cover for a book one of these days. Um, what what the free market builds is slums. If you want to affordable housing built by a unregulated industry without government subsidy, you'll get slums. If you want good quality affordable housing, you need the government to be involved. And we've
Yes.
seen there are countries around that do this, that have vast stocks of municipal housing that is high quality, that is well maintained, and which is not a massive drain on the taxpayer or anything like that, because people still pay rent. It's that first point of actually building the thing that is the part where the government needs to be involved. Um,
Yeah. And they need to work together. The government needs to work with developers, all levels of government. It's not just a city issue, it's a regional issue, it's a federal issue. Housing, they need to work with developers, and there needs to be some incentive for developers to, add affordable. I mean, there are some policies in place that could be used and some tools, but that's
Well,
a whole other issue on its own, really. But I think
it,
another problem with Burlington is that it just you like we said, it gets into an us versus them, and people will say, "Oh, I'm not against growth. I'm not against more housing. I'm just against super tall buildings." And then my problem has always been, well, then someone proposes a townhouse development, and then there's all kinds of disagreement with that. There's not enough parking, and there's the backyards are too, I don't know, they're too high, and they look into my backyard, and we just never have a full discussion of what we're trying to do. I mean, I guess we do at the official plan meetings and people that come out for that. There is a full discussion of what's happening. But I think you're just regular people who don't have time to make this their full time job,
well,
don't really understand what Burlington's trying to do.
but that's where our elected officials need to step in. That's where they need to
Yes,
step in and say,
and the media, right? It
and the
circles
media
back
and the
to
media
that.
to say, like, what are we trying to build here? One of the things that we've always thought that at least what I thought we need is more public access for Wi-Fi.
Yeah,
We've seen here, we're over a year now into the pandemic. People are working from home. People like to go for walks in parks now that it's still legal to do so. Um, it
is it legal? I'm not sure.
who knows? Who knows? That's a different
I know.
episode. But but people, like, our work lives have changed, that we're no longer turning into these commuter suburbs. We're now turning into, well, no, people want to live here and stay here all the time. go out for a bite to eat, go out for a drink, go out to grab a cup of coffee. I can do my work from home. I can log on to a Zoom call, Teams meeting, whatever the case may be. I can do this all from home. We need to start facing the reality that that means our cities have to change. We might need to accept the fact that, yeah, more high rises, but that doesn't mean that we have to give up on green space. Like, yet
No.
I think the problems that we always get, there's, again, coming back to the us versus them debates, is that these debates don't get turned into what do we want the city to look like? What do we want the region to look like? It turns into, well, what is this one square block, this one city block going to look like? I don't like that. Therefore, tear the whole thing down.
Yeah, and I feel there's been so the Places to Grow Act, which is what 2006, something like that. The Places to Grow Act did a lot, had a really, it fundamentally changed the way we look at development in a good way. It was fundamentally a good act that has had
Mhm.
a bunch of unforeseen circumstances, which tends to be, that's what happens with legislation. Um, and one of the products of that was the urban growth centre thing, which again, in principle, is a fine thing. The idea of putting people next to transit, absolutely a fine, good thing. As long as you get those, as long as you actually have transit where you say you have transit. Um, However, I was just looking. This is the irony of the situation is that the Halton region right now is just going into its regional official plan process, and it's putting out various things at the moment, asking for input. I challenge you to go and find any newspaper, local, regional, or otherwise, that is mentioning this. When there's exactly the same process happens at a city level, or hell breaks loose, the region has far more power than the city does over what happens in any particular place. And yet the regional story will not be reported because you can't basically sell a regional story anywhere in this province, I don't think.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, it's and yet they're going through exactly the same stuff. Where do you want to put things? Do you want to allow, basically they are offering right now four choices, I believe, between, highest density to lowest density, with some green space being built on to no green space at all being built on, and then all kinds of like huge numbers of like, well, if you go with this route, um, there may not be enough employment lands to provide jobs for people. And it's like, is that really true? Or is that, I think what the ultimate problem is in Ontario, actually in North America, I think the ultimate problem is that the car centric nature of things and the single family home centric nature of things, that we built everything for the car, means that the places that we allow for development, either you can build on a green field that's never been built on before, or you can build in an urban growth center. An urban growth center is maybe like 1 or 2% of a total city's area, and we're just saying that all the rest is basically off limits. You cannot put a triplex or a duplex in a next. You can put a huge McDonald mansion on my street, which could easily house 10 people if you divided it up
Yeah.
into apartments. But try and build something the same size that will house 3 families, and you'll never get away with it. Now, the reason that cities traditionally haven't done that is because, the voters freak out when that stuff comes up too. But they're going to freak out anyway. It's the ultimate lesson. I mean, doesn't matter what you do, people are going to hate it. And I think, given that fact, better to take on the whole issue of this nonsense of basically where middle class people live is untouchable, and everywhere else you can put high rises. Well, no, that's not quite putting it right, but basically places where the wealthiest people live are the places where development is most controlled and it's most unlikely to allow any
Uh,
intensification whatsoever. And I think that's the big conversation that we need to be
I'm gonna
having now.
I'm gonna try. Okay, I'm gonna chime in because we're going to have to keep going on to our next topic, uh, which is what, Roland?
This is corruption. Corruption in well, possibly alleged corruption in Brampton, in Patrick Brown's City Hall, where the CEO, which the CAO, David Barrick, for those who aren't familiar with that particular phrase used in a city context, is the city manager, basically. It's the same thing. I don't know why he's called a CAO in Brampton, but he is. Has been faced by some serious allegations. There was a staff member a couple of weeks ago who basically did somewhat of a kind of whistleblower uh, um, an allegation of serious impropriety and was immediately fired. And now there have been the CAO has been questioned by members of council about his behaviour, about hiring people, about redesigning the entire process of auditing um, and overseeing city decisions, and redesigning it in such a way that the person who is tasked with making sure staff are behaving the way they should has to report to the main staff member in the city. Those two things are meant to be completely separate and completely separated for obvious reasons. Um, so, uh, yeah, there's I think this has really got to the stage now of a full on kind of scandal. The Pointer website and and podcasts have been at the forefront of this, done a really good job of kind of shining a light on this. And in fact, I think it's really down to them that this has now become something that the council itself is being forced to address. And well, yeah, it's a bad scene. Mr. Barrack was formerly employed by the Niagara Region Conservation Authority and left with other members who are also now employed in Brampton under a considerable cloud. Uh, Allegations again of impropriety. So this is a pattern that was kind of warned of when he was first hired by Patrick Brown. But guess what? These are old friends through the PC party who have, whose relationship goes back far beyond either of their involvement in municipal politics. Well, I know, Joel. What do you think? What was your take on this story?
My take is it stinks. Well, I mean, the Pointer, and if listeners remember, we had Simon Graywell on from the Pointer on a few weeks ago to talk about the need kind of to highlight stuff like this. But I mean, this is basically like to summarize. This Mr. Barrack, David Barrack, gets hired after being turfed out of Niagara region, the conservation in Niagara region for there's a dirty cloud hanging over him from being fired from that job, and then he falls back into a pretty good job with the city of Brampton, and it looks like we're not going to say for sure, but I mean it looks like a part of it was due to his connections with Patrick Brown. Patrick Brown is good friends with them, and you have to wonder about this. Like this, there's too many questions that not going answered here. Is my concern.
Because what a lot of people don't realize with a city manager is that council, it's the one position in a city staff, right, that council can hire and fire. So I'm assuming if it stinks too much, council can just vote to fire him.
Well,
But I don't know if it has to be unanimous. I don't think so.
But it sounds like the council's trying to do their due diligence and get to the bottom of this.
Sure.
I'm going to give the council the benefit of the doubt, because I mean the again, kudos to the Pointer, Nita Zafar, who's the reporter covering this. She's doing a fantastic job of it. But city council, like they're saying, like city councilor Jeff Bowman is asking David Barrack, what's going on? Basically, what's going on here, and he's just getting stonewall answers. I mean, the fact
silence.
the fact that you have the CAO moves the independent auditor, who's kind of meant to be like the checks and balance of the municipal structure, says, "Oh no, now you're going to report to me." Like basically the
Defeats
problem
the
there
whole
is
purpose.
well, the problem there is like, okay, so when the independent auditor says, "Well, I think the CAO is acting improperly," oh no, we'll just we'll shred that paper in the company shredder, and that won't be seen by city council. Is essentially what we're worried about here, and the whole situation just stinks to high heavens.
I suspect that I believe that Brampton may have a number of kind of rookie councillors who were involved, because they would have been involved in the hiring of Mr. Barrack at the same time as Patrick Brown became mayor. And well, I certainly suspect if I'd been a new councillor at the time of hiring, it's probably a good time to pull the wool over the eyes of a new councillor the first few months of that they're in the job. It, and that's sometimes, well, very often in politics, people then don't want to admit the mistakes they've made when it turns out later that they should have been a bit more careful about what they were doing.
Okay, but Roland, like I'm not gonna impugn any new time counselor or any counselor at all. From what we're hearing, it appears that this gentleman, Mr. Barrack, was hired due to his close relationship with Mayor Patrick Brown. I mean, and like according to
Oh,
the facts of the
absolutely, yeah.
story, like this wasn't like a passing casual relationship. They were good friends, a long-standing professional friendship from their days in the Progressive Conservative Party provincially. So this doesn't appear to be like I he sounded like a good guy to me. It sounds like more information needs to be brought to light on this one, because there's stuff that is not adding up, and people I don't think are going to be walking away scot clean on this one for sure.
But it's the kind of thing where a council probably just wasn't paying attention to this.
True.
A council's not really involved in the staff to the extent of they know who's reporting to who exactly at all times and things that get shifted. And now the bizarre thing is that this Mr. Barrack is saying, "Oh, this is the way it always was.
Which
Right.
It's always
clearly,
been like this." And it seems so easy to prove. I don't really understand
It
that
was
part.
proved that the counselor Bowman brought out to no, it wasn't
He
always
said
this way. In
no.
fact, like he was saying, I was in the meeting when we actually officially made it official, the reporting structure of the city. So no, this wasn't always the case. You just did it
No.
on your own volition. And it's one of those things like again, I'm just toting our own horn here. We had Shauna Stolte on to talk about what it's like to be a counselor. Like people being a city councilor is a lot different than being like an MP or an MPP in elected office. Like you don't, it's still in many ways structured around the idea like it's a part-time job, and that we don't really want to give you that much power over the governance of the city, right? Like
Right.
if you thought the councilor as the MP or an MPP of the city of Brampton, they would have legal rights and legal obligations to say no. I want to call an investigation. I want to call a committee meeting. I want to get to the bottom of this. A lot of this is like, yeah, you're right, Shannon. Like this comes back to like, oh, we discovered it after the fact because we don't really have the structure isn't there for us all to talk to each other and say, are we comfortable with this guy? We all have to decide like right then in the council chambers as one. We can't say, no, what, no, I want to talk with you about this offline because something about this doesn't smell right to me. I don't know what. I want to get to the bottom of it, but I need time. Can he buy me buy me a week for us to really make a decision here? That doesn't
Yeah.
happen at the municipal level.
and that's more the point I was making with the kind of rookie councillor thing, that a new mayor wanting to bring in his friend was like, hey, this guy's really good. I can vouch for him. He's great. And you're a rookie councillor. You're completely on your own. You don't have staff who will go and do the background research for you. You don't have time, like you say, to kind of go offline and say, okay, tell me more about this. Your only time to kind of consider that will be in a council meeting. Probably one because of staffing matter that's held in camera, but still doesn't really make any difference. It's kind of a public forum. It's and this is a kind of inherent problem with it. Again, a fundamental problem I think with the way municipalities work, and that stories like this in Brampton are happening all over the place. This is a particularly bad example, but we've spoken how many times about a situation in Hamilton where just the kind of arrogance and hostility displayed by members of council towards members of the public, the dysfunctionality of well, to a certain amount, a sort of semi-dysfunctional relationship between staff, councillors, and the general public. All three elements not really getting on with the other two elements. there seems to be a constant pattern those cities that I've paid any particular close attention to all seem to go into this same pattern. And we spoke to Joey Coleman a month or so ago, and sort of like, what's the ultimate problem here? And he pointed towards the sort of lack of a properly funded kind of oversight. I believe there is an ombudsman, but I don't think that's a particularly well-funded entity. So cities are kind of very much under their own guidance to kind of make sure that they're running themselves properly, which seems like asking for trouble.
Well, I was going to say it is wrong. Like if you think about it, cities today were founded on average in the 19th century, right? When like because every city in Ontario is a product of the province legislation. The province creates an act that says we are going to create the city of Hamilton. We are going to create the city of Brampton, the city of Burlington, the city of Mississauga, whatever. It's all an act of the province. A lot of that is generated underneath the idea of a 19th century thinking, which was mostly just you just need to pave some roads, put in a market to sell your hogs at the fair and your produce from the fields. The idea was like the cities were just commercial hubs where the farmers would bring in livestock and crops to sell at the market, put it on a train and ship it off to a port or Toronto or Montreal. That was the ultimate idea of what a city was going to be. Our cities have grown. They're more nuanced. They are far more dynamic than that 19th century thinking. Yet the structures that are relied to govern those cities are still that 19th century thinking. Nobody thought of, hey, the city, like I don't know what the corporation of the city of Burlington or the city of Brampton has, but I mean we're talking multi-million-dollar entities. Like these are huge corporations, right? Like if they were traded on the stock market, they would be sizable entities with real estate and staff and whatnot. So we need to treat them as such, which is greater oversight, especially because they're our entities. We own them through our tax dollars and our votes, but they aren't given the proper tools to govern and to oversight and to check on themselves, to give them checks and balances to say, are we making the right call? Are we hiring the best people to govern us?
The longer time goes on, the more I question our weak mayor system, our weak council system, really. Our cities, in some ways, are almost only semi-democratic, and then we elect people, but those elected people have quite limited power. Now, sometimes I look at many councillors and think, thank God they don't have more power. I mean, they've already got too much. However, that's me being less cynical, and thinking that we need more democracy, not less democracy, and that democracy is best when it's operating closest to the people, not when it's remote. The democracy in Ottawa is not much use to me most days of the week because it's so far away and it's dealing with things that are very kind of on a scale that's beyond my doesn't impact me, quite frankly, on a day-to-day basis very often. Whereas council politics, if they cut the budget on the garbage collection, well, I'm going to have trash outside my house pretty damn quickly. Although I should point out that's a regional, not a city issue. It doesn't seem right that we elect these people who are then, to a significant degree, at the mercy of staff, even though staff are almost always well-intentioned. They're at the mercy of what the staff kind of put in front of them, when they put it in front of them, how they frame what is put in front of them. And that councillors councillors in many parts of Ontario earn something like $20,000 a year. Like the deputy mayor of London, not a 905 city, I know, but we'll use him as an example. Extremely talented guy who we had on back in the fall sometime, talking about the ranked ballot issue. I believe he will have earned, for what was very, very much a full-time job, about $20,000 a year. You can't ask people to do that. You're treating people who are putting their life and soul into something as amateurs, and then also not really giving them the power that they need to make serious change, because the staff, again, this is not a criticism of City Hall staff. I think it's a criticism of a way that institutions operate. Institutions tend towards conservatism, protecting. It's just the bigger you grow, the more people want to protect their little fiefdoms, and again, people don't like change. It's not just in we don't like change on our streets where we live. We also don't like change in our offices where we work. It's purpose of democracy to get us out of that rut and to direct our institutions in a way that we can actually get the change that needs to happen. And yet, if councillors basically are held up every step of the way because they can't talk to each other, they can't have a kind of platform. I mean, whatever you put on your literature when you go door to door as a councillor is a joke, because most of it will never happen because you have no power to pursue any of it.
No.
I mean, it's a frequent kind of joke amongst candidates, really. I mean, it's like, yeah, these are my aspirations. Whether it happens, God only knows. Most likely not, because I have no idea who my colleagues are going to be. And even if all my colleagues agree with me, trying to, well, you can give staff directions. Staff direction is not like a prime minister having an agenda for government, having cabinet meetings, having that kind of concentrated, directed purpose that actually can change the way we are governed. I mean, that's my feeling right now is like, again, but this is not a conversation that's happening anywhere. That I think so many people feel that they are not well represented by the way things work in municipalities, and yet no political party is even talking about this subject, about having not just tinkering with the edges, but major change to the way our municipalities work. That's my TED talk for the week.
You took the words right out of my mouth, Roland. We need to start thinking about actual legitimate change at our municipal levels and start treating the problems we have as real problems, not imaginary, and not to be avoided, because they're happening.
Sure. And decide who runs the city. I mean, I think there's so much friction in every city between the council and the staff. Who's really in charge here?
Well,
A city staff is supposed to be accountable to council. Council's accountable to the residents.
That's
But
what bothers me, is that I understand, we kind of come back to the whole idea of, oh, well, council has to be the paragon of democracy and whatnot. No, you're elected to behave properly. If you act improperly, if you're crooked or whatnot, you should be turfed out. If you don't, if the people still vote you back in, they get what they deserve. That's the point of democracy, is that you don't get the perfectly right candidate for the job. You get the candidate that you choose. We have had
right.
really horrible people elected to office. The current iteration of the provincial government, a lot of people are going to say that they were the wrong people to handle this global pandemic. Yep, that's what we got. That, like it or not, that's who's in charge, because that's democracy. Will they make it to the next one? Have no idea. I wouldn't put it past them still getting reelected. I really would not. But that's democracy. We get what we deserve. And what angers me is that we don't have that same level of respect for our municipal councillors. They should be able to have more power, to be able to step in situations like this and say, this doesn't pass the smell test. I have issues here. I'm calling a mulligan or whatever. I want this to go to a committee. I want an investigation. I want this to be something doesn't smell right here, and I'm not just taking you on your good word without more accountability. Go ahead, Shannon.
No, especially as you were saying, as cities have become far more complicated than they were ever designed to be. Like you said, I mean, even 30, 40 years ago, probably Burlington's, their biggest issues were the parade. They'd vote on a parade, or, the issues are so much more complex now. And it really does raise the question of how much power should the councillors have.
And I think ultimately you have to trust democracy, don't you? It's like, yeah, I mean, it's absolutely, like, I made the joke about, you look at some councillors and think, thank God they don't have more power. But I don't you can't have it both ways. I think ultimately you have to trust it. And I think maybe if you trust democracy and trust the voter, basically, we don't have to trust the councillors. We need to trust the voters, and you give them the responsibility that they deserve. I think you're likely to get better results. You're likely, on the average, to get better people running for the job, better people. Right now, a lot of people don't want to run for the lower levels of government because it's frankly not that interesting to them, or the pay is atrocious, or it's not atrocious in every city, I should add, but certainly atrocious in some. And again, the idea that, say, in a city the size of Burlington, 7 people is a decent size for a council, I think is something that needs to be seriously discussed as well. We needed 12 people 20 years ago, and now we only need 7. I think, and then you take Toronto, where we have an even crazier situation, of course, where you've got 1 councillor for the size of a complete riding. I mean, we need to trust these people to make decisions, and you need to have enough people that they can make appropriate levels of decisions.
Let's leave it at that for this week, because we're coming up on 45 minutes. So you know what? I'm going to say thank you to Shannon for coming back. We'll hope to have you on again sometime soon for another riveting conversation on the 905er. But thank you for coming on, and we'll talk with you everyone later.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns, or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.
Looking to make the most out of this life and optimize your personal wellness? Then check out the Natural Man Podcast. Join me, host Mike C., as we explore all areas of human wellness, physical, mental, and emotional. Learn strategies to optimize your own well-being and be in the driver's seat of your own health. Remember, your doctor works for you. Learn biohacks, neurohacks, ways to improve sleep, and ways to optimize your body and your mind. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, the Fountain app, and at naturalmanpodcast.com.